At 19,200 acres, Fisher's Peak is the largest state park which is owned by the state park system. Here to tell us more about the park is Crystal Dreiling. Crystal?
Thank you, Bill. Hi, everybody. I'm Crystal Dreiling. I'm going to share my screen here in a second. I'm not a pro at this, but thank you so much for having me and inviting me to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is Fisher's Peak State Park. There we go. Okay, so someone just send me a signal if you're not hearing me okay, but thanks for that great intro, Bill. So yeah, I've worked for Colorado Parks and Wildlife for as long as I can remember, and I'm here tonight with an invitation to talk about Fisher's Peak State Park. I have been on this project from day one for the most part, so almost 3 years. I'll also say that I've been managing Trinidad Lake State Park down here in Trinidad for about 8 years. So my time down here in Trinidad, I call it the land of milk and honey. It's a beautiful place to live, has been about 8 years. So 3 years with both Fisher's Peak State Park and Trinidad Lake State Park. I also want to open by saying that I am absolutely not a bird expert. So I might be a Fisher's Peak State Park expert, but definitely not a bird expert. So happy to tell you what I know and answer what I can. And then if there are specific questions, Bill promised me maybe somebody else can answer them if they're about birds. So with that, I guess kind of give just a little bit of a lay of the land for Fisher's Peak State Park. Bill told you it's 19,200 acres roughly. It's a really rugged and rough country. If you're on the interstate going south of the city of Trinidad, you'll start to see Fisher's Peak State Park on the east side of the interstate, right on the interstate, right around mile marker 10. And all the way down to the state line is Fisher's Peak State Park. So we have a whole bunch of land connected to the interstate, I-25, and then we've got private property around the north and the south. We've got adjacent to other Colorado Parks and Wildlife properties, so the James M. Johns State Wildlife Area and the Lake Dorothy State Wildlife Area to the east of Fisher's Peak State Park. So we've got some great landscape blocks that we've made bigger with the purchase of CPW, and that you'll kind of see that on maps as we go through this. But so not only is the property 19,200 acres, it also, when you're on the property, you'll gain 3,000 feet of elevation. So when we talk about any kind of species out here, there's opportunity for a lot of diversity because the property itself is very diverse. We start in the lower pinyon juniper forest and end up in on these mesa tops and in forests that have ponderosa and fir trees and all that stuff. So what I have here is a presentation that we've recently used for our interest group and public presentations through our master plan process. So I thought it would be really relevant for this conversation because it kind of gives you a tour of the property and of our process. I think that a lot of people not only want to know about the property, but they want to know about how we're building this new state park. So I'll go through this PowerPoint and kind of share all this with you all. It's not very often that we purchase a state park or establish a state park and then open it to the public within less than a year. And that's kind of what we did here. So CPW purchased the property in fee title in April of 2020. And then I was told to have it opened by the bosses by June of 2020 during COVID. We couldn't quite open anything that quickly, but we were able to open a small portion of the park to the public in the end of October of 2020. So we quickly found and surveyed an area in the northwest corner of the property that was already disturbed mostly by previous mining activity and then also the development or the development of I-25. So we have about 250 acres that we opened to the public there in October of 2020, just barely 2 miles of trail. So it's a really minimal opening there, but the leadership for CPW and the governor wanted folks to be able to get their boots on the ground, and it's sort of a new concept for CPW. And to be honest, I thought that we'd get a lot of negative feedback to have such a small portion of such a large park open to the public. But we have had really nothing but great feedback and excitement. And I think it is an opportunity for people to be on the property, explore a small part of it, but kind of also get the idea of the treasure that we have there right outside of Trinidad and the diversity of the property, and kind of feel that excitement as we build it. So this last year and a half has been a huge push for the master plan, which of course kind of gives us our roadmap for the state park. After the master plan is approved here in early 2022, we will start to also define our management plan. So some of this stuff will bleed over into the park management plan. So from day one, we set out on the property, trying to learn about the property. And of course, where we knew we were going to develop, that was where we did the more intense rapid ecological assessment, cultural surveys and stuff like that before we did any ground disturbance or open that area to the park. So it's a little bit of the background of a giant project. So very early on, the goals of the partners, and I'll step back just a little bit to say that from the beginning, the partners on this project have been the City of Trinidad, GOCO, Great Outdoors Colorado, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and of course, the Nature Conservancy and Trust for Public Land, who really stepped in early on to help make this purchase possible. It was something like $24 million to purchase this ranch, the Crazy French Ranch, from Evelyn Young, who'd owned it since about '86. And so it was a huge purchase price. We could not have done this without our partners. Also, a wildly accepted project from the locals in Trinidad. And so we still have that great support, which has been key for this giant project. So from the beginning, the 5 partners on this really wanted to be able to balance recreation opportunities and conservation on this property, seeing that both are very important. And so we've had great teams learning about this property, digging up the literature, really coming together from all walks of life and around the state to figure out how we can do this best. No project is going to be perfect, but this one has been, I will say, a very meaningful and thoughtful process from the beginning. So not only did we want to put those pillars of recreation and conservation in the forefront from the beginning and really have these conversations at the same time, we also wanted to make sure that we had a robust public process. So maybe a little bit more robust than past state parks openings. And so that's been keeping us busy throughout the year. We've had interest groups that were mostly organizations and businesses. We've had local stakeholder groups, dignitaries, politicians, teachers, and then also multiple public presentations for the general public, and also opportunities for folks to send in questions and complete surveys there on site. So we have been sharing information in both directions and many directions for over a year now. So in addition to the groups that I mentioned, we also did something different with this project and reached out to all 48 tribes that would have some sort of connection to Colorado. We wanted a really meaningful partnership with the tribes from the beginning for this project, which doesn't always happen for one reason or another. So in October of 2020, Dan Gibbs, the director of Department of Natural Resources, sent a letter inviting representatives from those 48 tribes to come to the table with us and learn about this property and have an opportunity to help us plan it and protect it. So that has been another leg of this project, which has been very exciting and also painstaking and groundbreaking. And so we're sort of inventing the wheel there, but it's been really rewarding so far. And we're hoping to have, meaningful relationships with the interested tribes for the life of this project, this park. So it's been really great in that respect. So we're just now getting to the point with the tribes where we're having them on site for visits to cultural sites that we found, and also finding sites that we don't know about yet, obviously. All right, so that kind of talks a little bit about I could go on for the whole day about all of the public outreach, but some of the stuff that we learned from the public and from our stakeholder groups and our interest groups was the stuff that we saw right away as the initial stewards of this property and the initial explorers of this property, I guess, is the things that really rose to the top for the public and for us is the need to maintain the natural environment, the finding unique opportunities for recreation. I mentioned that Trinidad Lake State Park is down here in Trinidad, and that's the lake that you can see in this image. And, from the beginning, I asked the planners that we not recreate anything that's going on at Trinidad Lake State Park. So we have this opportunity to have more of a front country experience with Trinidad Lake State Park, which offers boating, shoreline fishing, light trail use. There's about 12 miles of trail at Trinidad Lake State Park, full hookup camping, so sewer, water, electrical there at Trinidad Lake, and the story goes on. But just a few miles away from Trinidad Lake, as you can see, this picture is taken from near the peak there, Fisher's Peak. Just a few miles away, we have this opportunity to have a very rugged backcountry experience, hopefully, for our users. And that was what the property was telling us. And that was also what the public was telling us. So diverse recreation experiences. We have an opportunity to start out as great stewards for this land and to also make this a teaching property. It's been important for me and for the planning team from the beginning that we keep this property relevant, for the local community and for users around the state. So not only looking at what types of recreation are needed locally, but what's getting overrun around Denver, for example, and what could we offer down here, such as more mountain biking trails, more trails in general, wildlife viewing opportunities and whatnot. So we wanted to set a precedent of inclusivity through our outreach and planning process. I didn't mention that, but we did, similar to the tribes, we had a separate interest group to make sure that we were tapping into to communities that are not generally included in the planning and development of state parks, to ask what it is that they would like to see out here. And so we've had ongoing conversations with a specific group on diversity and inclusivity. So we've been doing deep dives also with the historical research for the project that is ongoing. I can tell you that every day I learn something new or hear from somebody else whose great grandfather, ran cattle on this property back in the early 1900s. So we're still learning, but this park is pretty magical in a lot of ways, including the history that we're uncovering. As I said before, we want what we have out here for the public to be meaningful. And then also, of course, the city of Trinidad is looking for economic growth from such a large state park, and also from having 2 state parks in one city. And so other entities have been looking at the economic benefits and the potential with 2 state parks in the city of Trinidad and one of this magnitude. But then also from the beginning, we've talked about managing expectations. And so from the very first public meeting that we had, we've kind of had to caution folks that Fisher's Peak State Park is giant and it's exciting and it's lovely, but it certainly can't be everything for every person. And so we I've tried to sort of keep that message closer to the forefront from the beginning, because we don't want to overrun this property. We don't want to love it to death. We want the planning and the development to match the spirit of the property, and to not create something that it is not. So this is a photo of one of our recent site tours with our stakeholders. They actually got to go out and tour Fisher's Peak State Park with us, and we presented to them different concepts that we have for the visitor center, the entrance gate, the campgrounds, backcountry camping, trails, of course, and different trailheads, all of that stuff. And so it was a full day. We did this 3 different days with various groups. And then we took it to the public presentation here in Trinidad last Thursday. So this is an example of a site visit. That's Fisher's Peak there in the background. That's Bill Mangle presenting a concept map to our stakeholders there. Talking about at this site, for example, we're seeing potential cabins, camping, not necessarily in that meadow, trying to leave that meadow completely free of development, other than maybe a trail. But behind these folks' backs would be something like some camping and some cabins. So that's an example of where we took these folks for this tour. And that's kind of back in those trees is where we were kind of thinking for some camping. And then over the photo on the left is one of the existing trails that we built. It's a very short trail. I think it's about 1,400 feet. And that's the current end of that trail. It will continue to be built, but you can see Fisher's Peak right there. That's what we're calling our first look trail there at the trailhead for the first trailhead for Fisher's Peak State Park, which we named Fisher's Peak Trailhead. Okay, so this is a great visual, if everybody can see it, of, people are constantly wanting to compare Fisher's Peak to other state parks. And I don't know if I need to zoom in on that, but I think that might be Cheyenne Mountain State Park. Oh yeah, Cheyenne Mountain State Park. So this is showing the size of this state park, Fisher's Peak, in comparison to a large park like Cheyenne Mountain State Park. You can kind of see the trail system at Cheyenne Mountain State Park and what kind of a landmass that would affect. And then maybe try to remember that when we go further in the presentation and see some conceptual trails and development for Fisher's Peak State Park. And so this is Staunton State Park. So we've also overlaid Staunton State Park, which is the newest state park before this one, over Fisher's Peak State Park. So it really does a good job of letting you know how really large Fisher's Peak State Park is. This slide here shows a lot of the, one of the things that we want to make sure people understand is that for this project, for this state park, we have so many layers of information that we're putting together right now, but that have been gathered from day one. So we've had folks obviously coming out to inventory our birds and to look for our raptors. And we've had botanists come out, and we've had foresters come out, and we've had students from CSU doing vegetation mapping project out here. We have reptiles that have been surveyed out here, cultural surveys. So we do have the endangered New Mexico meadow jumping mouse out on this property. So this this little map in the top left corner here shows our highest sensitivity there. So it's alluding to a raptor nest there in the cliff bands, and then also these yellow drainages where we know that we have the New Mexico meadow jumping mouse, and we're still doing trap nights and still looking in those drainages for the mouse. And then we have, for example, we have down here in the low right corner, is the work that we're doing on trying to, on this property, when we purchased it, we have at least 90 miles of ranch roads, so 90 miles of internal roads to either keep or let go back to nature. And so we're looking at that. And as we're considering those things, we're looking at what do we need for emergency response? What do we need for upkeep of the park? What do we need for potential fire response? And what can we return back to nature so that we can grow these landscape blocks, these habitat blocks on the property, hoping to do, more good than harm with our interaction out there. And so you can kind of see that we're looking at what we might be able to increase as habitat if we start to eliminate some of these roads strategically. So that's an example of that. But really the slide is to just show all of the layers, just some of the layers really that go into the planning of this property. It certainly isn't like throwing a dart at a map. Oh, so there's a blow up of these habitats. So these, all of these black lines here are showing existing roads here. They're everywhere. I recently met Evelyn Young, the owner of the property, the crazy French woman who now has a ranch in Santa Fe. She's a lovely person, but she told me that she thinks there's 300 miles of roads out there that she helped create while she was there. So what we've mapped is about 90. This is an example of the sort of habitat sensitivity map that we made with many different, so overlaying all of the different sensitive pieces of this property. So whether it's plants or raptors or mice, essentially, as you look at this, the darker the purple, the more sensitive the land is or the habitat is. And then the lighter the color, the less sensitive it is. And most of that lighter color is just due to previous disturbance before we own the property. And so the property kind of tells you this too, because we have a lot more moisture, a lot more vegetation. We see a little bit more species diversity here on the eastern edge of the property from north to south. So this is a visual of the park that shows slope. And essentially the orange and the yellow is where you're going to get a little bit more flat. So this is the mesa that is the James M. John State Wildlife Area. So it shows you some flat ground here. The green and the blue is more of the slope that you're going to see. So it shows you the steepness out there. So you can see there's not a whole lot of yellow and orange on this property. So it illustrates how difficult it is to plan and develop on a property like this that is it comes to us with lots of contours. Similar, so this is aspect. So this shows the south facing aspects are going to be these warmer colors, the red and the yellow or orange, and then the north facing aspects are the cooler colors, so the blue and the purple. So that's something that obviously we look at in a lot of ways, if we're talking about where we want to put a campground so it's not constantly in the shade, or where we're going to put our trails so that they've got a little bit of, they've got a mixture so that you're not walking all day in the sun, you're not walking all day in the shade. So we look at things like this as we're planning development on the park. This one here is looking at existing roads, I believe. This is one of the steps that the planners took in showing themselves and ourselves where some of the more interesting things are, whether interesting in the way that we want to bring people to it. Maybe it offers a really neat sandstone structure or feature. There's some really interesting sandstone out there. We're finding slick rock and great sandstone boulder fields and all kinds of things like that. There's a lot of views on this property, which are amazing. The planners think that that's what's going to be very characteristic of this property for the trail goer, is the opportunity for great views everywhere you go, and certainly up at the peak once they get there. So this is us getting closer to the more final product for the master plan. All of our state parks have management zones, and this is using the same thing. So you can see in the key here that the protection zone, the most protected is this green area. And so you can see that a majority of the properties kind of fallen in this protection zone, which makes us all feel pretty good. The next step up is the natural area, and that's kind of this brown color here. And then we have our, we're kind of getting closer to some development and passive recreation here in the pink. And then the yellow is a development zone. So if you look at this entire property, the development zone is relatively pretty small. We're trying to stick to the already disturbed corridor here along the interstate, and then come in here for visitor center. These little hot pink shapes would be the proposed campgrounds. This white bold line here is the next round of trails that's already been funded to build, and we're hoping to break ground on these in this next spring. This is about 20 miles of trail that folks will be able to use in addition to the current 2 that would be available to the public, hopefully in 2.5 years. This is also the trail to the peak. So you can see here this concept for the trail to the peak, and then maybe a little trail looping the peak up here. This is where Fisher's Peak itself is. And so this will be really exciting. This is where we'll be able to invite mountain bikers out and obviously give hikers many more miles of trail. And then here, these dotted lines are the proposed, conceptual trails for the rest of the development of the park. You can see that there's one trail that we're proposing to go down into the south end of the park. This right here is a mesa. So we're looking at having this trail come up to the mesa and giving people that mesa opportunity. But really not a whole lot of development at all down in this south half or more of the park. And then these trails here, again, I could go into great depth, but essentially you're looking at multi-use trails. There's equestrian trails. We're trying to use the existing roads that we will keep for a lot of the equestrian trails, but there will be equestrian opportunity in some more single track type trails, so not just roads, because we know that equestrians want a little bit of both. Let's see. And so down here also, I'll mention that there's interest in having a little bit more development just in this little corner of the southern portion. This is currently where hunters are allowed to stage. We do allow hunting on the property right now by permit only. And so we've had basically one hunter per rifle season, for example, at a time. This is their staging area. And we're envisioning that this might be a great place to also have some equestrian camping opportunities, hunter camping, and maybe a little bit more backcountry camping. We do envision some backcountry opportunities on the property to give everyone an idea. Once we build this next round of trails, the miles to the peak from the trailhead over here would be 8 one direction. And also 3,000 feet of elevation gain. So 16 miles round trip with quite a lot of elevation gain and some rugged terrain. And so that's what folks are looking at early on. And so we do intend to have some backcountry camping here in the next 5 years or so, hopefully, for folks who want to make a bigger day out of it or an overnight out of it. Oh, I guess that was the end of that one. Unfortunately, I don't have drone footage for everybody. So let's see here. So this is just an example of, I don't know if everybody's seeing that, but this is an example of what we've brought to the public to kind of show how we have, how we're exploring these different exits. Everyone had an idea of which exit we should use, for example, for the entrance to the state park. So it shows some of the benefits of different locations and some of the drawbacks. And this is an example of what we brought to our stakeholders and our interest groups during these site tours. So I'm going to pause there, and I feel like I've done more talking in one straight string than I have in years. So I don't know if we want to break for questions or have me focus in on something that's a little bit more interesting to you guys.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Yes, we've had a number of questions. One was, I know you're not a birder. You made that clear, and we know about that. One person has pointed out there's like 30 eBird checklists that have been done by visitors and have already recorded about 70 species of birds on your property. Do you have any idea of, has there been any in your surveys and with the people that have been down there, any talk about migration routes, particularly with the different habitats that you have there, and the conservation aspects to that, if there are migratory bird routes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I'm sure that so we have our CPW folks doing some of this birding stuff. We also have volunteers, folks that might be on this call right now who've been out there, seeing what they can find. And then also a paid, a contracted person who's come out year after year to kind of do these inventories. So I can't speak specifically to the migratory piece at this time. We definitely are still learning about the property. But I can talk about, we've got the species diversity on this property is what really is striking, no matter what you're talking about, but especially if you're talking about birds. So for example, they found so far 5 species of woodpecker, 5 species of owl, 8 species of warbler. We do have the oven birds on the property, 3 species of breeding vireo. I don't even know how to pronounce that. I'm sorry. And a number of other species that are breeding, on the property or in the area. So sorry, I can't answer that specifically. I don't know if anybody else can.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What kind of habitats do you have in that 3,000 altitude range from prairie up into the mountains?
Yeah, so generally you're looking at the pinyon juniper up and down the western side of it, and then I don't think I have it in here, but there's a map that kind of shows a delineation there from the pinyon juniper to the ponderosa forest, so the mixed conifer forest, and then the mesas have that sort of high elevation grasslands there.
And go ahead.
I haven't really mentioned the springs and we've got a lot of springs and seeps on the property. So there's surprisingly a lot of water in the higher elevation there. And then also a couple more perennial streams, one on the north end and one in the south. So good amount of water for this area.
Any fishing there, or do people have to go over to Trinidad Lake for that?
Yes, so probably no fishing. All of the ponds that we've seen are not lasting, more than a summer season. So there will not likely ever be any fishing out here, but great fishing at Trinidad Lake.
Okay. And what's the altitude of Fisher's Peak?
Yeah, so the top of the peak is 9,633. And the city of Trinidad is about 6,400.
96.
So you're getting about 3,000 feet of elevation gain when you go up to the peak.
Uh-huh. So you get snow up there during the winter months then?
Yeah, and even, planning this property has required a lot of boots on the ground. Our planners have hiked hundreds of miles out there. I've tried to hike as many with them. I've probably been able to hike 100, a little over 100 with them. But for example, we were in about 4 feet of powder just below Fisher's Peak. So about 1,000 feet below Fisher's Peak in like April, I think. So this last winter, we had a whole lot of snow out there. So definitely some variations there. And on a given day, so on that day where we've ended up in that powder, we started out on dry ground at the visitor center, or not at the visitor center, but our headquarters near the interstate. And then we got into some mud and then some ice. And then eventually up below the peak, we were in 4 feet of powder on that property. So makes management and travel on that property pretty difficult.
Okay. Any plans to do spider surveys in addition to all the other critters you mentioned?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm trying to remember. I know that we've done moths and butterflies. I can't remember if there's been a specific spider survey. Nothing that comes to mind, but I think it has to happen. It's a great idea. Okay.
And when you're planning your trails, I imagine you're utilizing the roads, the existing roads there as trailheads as well.
Yeah, where we can. One of the things that was made abundantly clear when we had these heavy rains in May is that, and we said it from the beginning, because a lot of people suggested we just turn that 90 miles of ranch roads into our trail system and call it a day. And we did not want to do that, because those roads are not built for sustainability, and they're certainly not very fun to walk. I've had to walk a lot of them, and nobody wants to do that. So where it makes sense, we are using some of those ranch roads as a part of the trail system. But a lot of these roads were incredibly damaged by our sort of rainy season this last May. It was a whole lot of moisture for this area. And so, not to say that will happen every year, but we would, if that was our trail system, we would have constant closures of the trail system. And one thing I didn't mention, I think is important, just to draw attention to this shaded area in the green here. In here, this denotes closures. And so we do know that we've got an active peregrine nest on Fisher's Peak itself. And we are planning these trails for hard closures from March 15th to the end of July every year around the peak. Don't tend to let anybody within, I think it's a half a mile buffer. And we're planning the trails that way so that folks, when they get to that closure, they can loop back and create, have other looping opportunities to go back to their trailhead. But I almost forgot to mention that seasonal closures that will be in place as we learn about the successful nesting raptors out there.
It's great. Wonderful. Now, also, this is right, of course, close to the New Mexico line, and there's habitat, vital habitat right across the border that you're taking into account in your planning, right?
Yeah, so I can say that from the beginning, there's been interest in connecting Sugar Eat Canyon State Park, which is not quite touching Fisher's Peak yet. It's here off of the southeast corner of the property. And I can't speak to, what they find on their state park or in their area, but we do see that there are current efforts on the New Mexico side to purchase private property, turn it over to Sugar Eat Canyon State Park, and maybe someday connect these two state parks. So for an additional habitat protection in this area.
Great. Well, I think that's covered all the questions that we've gotten. Crystal, thank you so much for a most interesting program. It's can hardly wait to get down and when more of the park is open to public access.
Thank you for having me, and you're very welcome. I hope that I covered the bulk of what people want to see and hear about this state park.
Well, what a great addition to the state park system.